Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kua hui hui mai nei I tēnei rā, ka nui te mihi, ka nui te aroha. Nō reira, I te taha o tōku papa, ko māpuhi tōku iwi no Pākehā hau. I te taha o tōku mama, kaua e mohio o ku iwi no Pākehā hau. Ko Lara Greaves tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So I'm Lara Greaves, Dr. Lara Greaves from the Public Policy Institute and Compass, and Barry Milne's been a mentor of mine for a good 5 years now, I feel, probably Barry. And yeah, so really happy to be here today. Thanks to everyone for coming today. I'm kind of like, we started this again because of good old COVID. We started this technically in July last year, but Eileen and Cinnamon didn't come on board until about January. So we're a few months in. So unfortunately, it's just identity at this stage. There's no health and social service access needs. And I definitely would totally welcome any sort of feedback, any discussion afterwards. This is my first ever data lab or like non-survey, non-qual project. So this is like my first time entering the space and my first time doing a presentation based on IDI work. So there we go. I kind of came to this research, I think, oh no, my clicker. Okay, I'll just have to. Oh no, Baz, it's doing that thing. Okay. Yeah, okay, got it. So I came to this, oh yeah, so I'm gonna go through like why I came, how, where, what, when, why, all of that, and how I came to this research. The team and the process, because that's been really important in this, because I think a lot, like I've always had some interesting qualms about the IDI. Methods, which is the IDI, results, kind of where our preliminary results are sitting. And I don't necessarily, again, know the best way to present these yet. So definitely happy for feedback and figuring out how to do this discussion. And then some of our implications and next steps, because I'm constantly reminded that this is based on a Health Research Council Emerging Researcher First project over 2 years. And there's only so much I'm going to be able to do. And I'm still, again, it's like almost like that socialization I was talking about before. I feel like I've got to do everything all the time, all the publications, all the results, all the analyses. And I actually keep being reminded by various mentors to step that back a bit and just kind of progress and, you know, get the feedback and get the, just think about where you're going and what you're doing. So generally the way that I came to this project was, and like you might have caught it in my very brief paper in terms of on my mum's side, we don't know our iwi. I've tried, and now there are people that are going to help, and they better help. But basically, it's like for a lot of Māori, there's that kind of lack of being able to figure that, or not lack of in them, but the issues of colonization around severing those ties to whakapapa knowledge, right? So on one side of my whānau, like my grandfather is socially assigned Māori ethnicity by others. So that means he gets sort of the prejudice of against him being Māori, but then has always just identified as Spanish in our case. But other whānau will say, back then would have said sort of Italian or Greek, we've heard, all that kind of thing. So that's how he personally has identified, although he's now identifying as Māori. So, you know, and getting there with that. But it's one of those things where I was like, okay, sitting at good old government house at the University of Auckland with Jade LaGrice, who's a senior lecturer in psychology, and she's very Mātauranga Māori. And we're just sitting there chatting and having this discussion about where I fit, where she fits, and all that kind of thing, right? Because I think so much of it is figuring out where you can fit and be helpful, and where your personal story or that research is me search, using that as a strength, and where you come from and what you should or could do. And so we were just discussing that and where I would kind of end up there. And I just was really thinking about my grandfather at the time, who'd been diagnosed with cancer and was going through treatment and he's all good now, by the way. So yay, but he was going through in a private hospital. And I really thought about that in terms of, you know, his agency in that, and his sort of working really hard through the years and pretending to be Spanish and suppressing any kind of Māori ethnicity and feelings, this inability of feelings to connect. And in our whānau, we had like little bits and pieces and threads of Māori culture come through. Like I had a great grandmother who was gardening according to the maramataka, and that was how she would connect. So people's different stories and ways of being and stuff. So then I kind of thought, okay, let's look at that, what people call traditionally disconnected Māori space and explore it through this grant. So thanks, Jade. And then also, and this was in the context of that independent Māori health authority coming through, or potentially coming through at the time, when this was a couple of years ago when I was coming up with this. And we had the Y2575 report, and kind of thinking about implications of, again, people like my grandfather who had chosen or had the financial privilege to access private medical care in that point. And he'd always avoided that system, and talking to, like Andrew Spall, who we all work with, and others about that and their whānau as well. It's that whole thing of like not identifying as Māori in health records as well. So again, people's sort of agency and experiencing that, but figuring out where a lot of people would fit if, and it's been quite a nerve-wracking or nervous thing for me, rocking up into Māori spaces and figuring out where you fit as well. So thinking about where people would fit if they didn't know their whakapapa or didn't feel connected to Te Ao Māori, and if there's an independent Māori health authority, who would be perfectly welcoming of that, how they themselves would feel and their whānau would feel interacting with any kind of other Māori policy, Māori-led policy initiatives as well. And so, yeah, we know that there's racism in health towards Māori, kind of a lot of studies of that. I don't know how many studies we need, but we need more always. But, again, there's a lot of studies that's well established. And it's also quite well established that positive cultural identity helps buffer the negative effects of racism, or builds, I do a lot of snarky quotes, resilience, right? In people, and then they're able to sort of, it buffers those effects of a sort of negative society and racist society. So there's been a lot of sort of policy initiatives over the last 40, I'm doing math in my head, years, to try to reconnect Māori to cultural identity. And that always comes up in work a lot. So, it's like the other thing there was the questions around, yeah, of course we need these, but are there people who this still, like say, like wānanga to connect to whakapapa, that's still, what's the need there for that? Like trying to scope that need as well in some of this. Yeah, again, I'm a survey researcher. I've done like a fair number of surveys over probably about the last 10 years. And so this is me moving into a new space. So there's like limitations in doing a lot of the stuff with surveys, because people don't necessarily want to participate in surveys, no matter how much we annoy them. The New Zealand election study that Barry mentioned earlier, we actually started paying people. We just give them a $20 voucher. And we've got a great Māori response rate, because it's like, there's the answer, pay people for their time, because we're all getting paid for ours, right? So, and that's been something there. But generally, we've got this limitation around survey research not capturing everyone. And then also it's been really hard for me, and it's like I often correct my own language in this, because I've been socialized in like an academic system where and come through and I definitely have deficit framed in the past, and definitely done that myself. But it's like trying to grow as a researcher and trying to grow like other researchers, Māori and non-Māori, and then also in this space, so we can kind of, I don't know, like be in the space, not feel any kind of diminished sense of mana through deficit framing or work being done in certain ways. But then also a lot of the time, then that leads to a lot of self-analysis between me and Cinnamon, and trying to figure out how we do this. And then the other thing there, of course, is epistemologically, whakapapa is there whether you know it or not, in sort of a Māori epistemology or Te Ao Māori worldview. So that's the other thing where it's like, it's there, whether you know it or not. So it's like, we're trying to also figure out how we, with all of this quantitative stuff, bring in these threads of Te Ao Māori in this. So this has been kind of quite fun last 6 months. And so, yeah, early on in the journey, but this was the kind of graph that kind of got me, and something that I've been thinking about for years is that percentage of Māori, people of Māori descent who don't identify for iwi, and that being around 17% are census. And so, yeah, that whole idea of, okay, so where do these people go? How do they fit? What's happening with this? So I wanted to drill down on this. Also, as a political scientist, I've always been really interested in the Māori role. I've got a master's to explore why people choose the Māori role or general role. And so I've been really interested in that difference between people who have their Māori descent, or they know about their Māori descent, and then they don't necessarily identify as Māori. So that's my space and things that I'm interested in generally. So team and process. I've semi-stolen, but not really, because Alice still has her Cinnamon, who's a great emerging Māori researcher. And we've got Eileen as well. So that we're our sort of our day-to-day work group. Barry is serving as a mentor on the project. We've got a group of advisors as well, and so we're trying to consult them. They've got very different views and backgrounds, but all generally academics or academically sympathetic or close to. We've just recently formed an Indigenous Data Sovereignty reading group, which has been quite fun as well. And that's got everyone from sort of second year undergrads through to professors in it. And we're all equal, and and the PPI provides the kite. So that's why I'm using these slides. Part of them as well. But it's been great. That's been a great time we're just a few weeks in and we're getting into it. A later paper that we're really thinking about doing, and I've joined the Te Mana Raranga exec as well, the Māori Data Sovereignty Network exec, and we're looking at doing some kind of critical literature review on how, and people, this is an emerging area, is like, how do you do IDI research, but feel okay about it and make that kind of culturally safe, is the wording often used, for Māori. And we're going to, me and Cinnamon are starting a critical literature review on this as well, and just seeing. So again, also, if you know of any projects at the end, please let me know. I'll definitely take note of them, because that's where we're going later though. We still have to do our actual results. Methods, so I use the RDI, and I've got my disclaimer thing. Thanks, Eileen's been mentoring me through this, so I've got my disclaimer on there. This is based on the Census 2013, because there's Census 2018 data quality issues with the iwi identifier, which is a real shame there. And basically it's always good to, I feel, put the questions on the slide, but these are the questions that we're using. The classic wording here, which even this, like, I'll rant about it later, or rant about it now, but I feel like we do need some studies in that cognitive testing type vein, where we get a representative sample, whatever representative sample of Māori is, and get people to talk through their thoughts when they visit this question. Because even the way that this is worded, like, you see people on surveys writing next to it going, I am a Māori. You cannot say I'm descended, yeah, that kind of thing next to it. So are you descended from a Māori? That is, did you have a Māori birth parent, grandparent, or great grandparent, etc.? So using that broad Māori descent question. And then people get asked if they know the names of their iwi tribal tribes, and then yes or no. And so we're focusing on the people that said no here. And then, of course, we have there's my yellow boxes. And of course, here we have ethnicity as well, which is what we're looking at. And because it's important to try to think about this a bit in terms of, and again, we don't know the best wording around this, like sole identifying Māori, or people just that say that they are only Māori ethnicity, and people who identify also as Pākehā or Pacifica or with some other ethnicity, because we know there's going to be differences there. In the social psychology identity literature, they talk about drawing upon the cultural resources of another ethnicity. And so the idea would be, if you were Māori and Pākehā and you didn't know your iwi, that you'd maybe be drawing on the cultural resources of your Pākehā identity, or potentially the cultural resources of your Pacifica identity, in that, yeah, or Asian identity, or any, you know, all sorts of other things. I have a Māori Egyptian baby, so, you know, maybe Egyptian identities. So yeah, all sorts of diversity there. So methods, our initial plan as well was to use some of Kala Hokumo's Māori Identity and Financial Attitude Survey data, but just the questions weren't necessarily there. Same with the Youth 2000 survey series, I worked with both groups. And actually, as I'll reveal in a moment, the descent question isn't in some of those surveys, so it's kind of, we didn't quite go there. So instead, we've been using Kupinga 2013 to look at experiences of discrimination. And basically, like, the smallest group ends up being about 150 people. So it's, you know, we've got a reasonable enough number there. And again, that identity note that, and this is that thing that's always interested me, is that the Māori descent or whakapapa indicator of Māoriness is bigger than people who explicitly take their ethnicity as Māori. So it's something to note. And again, later we're moving on to health and social service outcomes. Eileen's been getting started on that. So looking at our results, and again, in the data that when we've selected stuff and all that sort of thing, we've ended up with 16.6% saying no, or 111,000 people saying that they don't know their iwi. So that's actually a lot of people when you think about the individuals in whānau. So we ended up categorizing people into 6 categories. And again, putting people in boxes is like always an interesting approach, but this is kind of how we've categorized people based on their descent, ethnicity, and iwi thing. So we've got sort of about 7.8% of our group didn't know the Māori descent group, didn't know their iwi, and they don't identify as Māori. So they've got Māori descent, but they don't know the iwi, they don't identify as Māori. Then we had 8% who know their iwi, but they don't identify as Māori. They don't tick the Māori ethnicity box. Now, this group's been really interesting, and particularly interesting because I feel like a lot of the identity stuff before is this idea that we have this difference between sort of descent and ethnicity, and those people in between in that gap, they are more like, people have called them in research like New Zealanders of Māori descent. You know, they don't think of themselves as Māori, but it's really interesting to us that more of them actually know their iwi. So that's like, okay. So that's why we ended up using different data in the end, because we do want to be able to think about this difference here, right? And then we've got the box that I've outlined with yellow, which was the group that people it'd be framed as a group of concern in terms of social psych literature and drawing upon the cultural resources and all of that. But these are people who say that they do not know their iwi and they only identify their ethnicity as Māori. So they don't identify as Pākehā, they don't identify with specific ethnicity, they only identify as Māori. And so then we instantly start thinking about this group in terms of, is it people going, no, I'm not telling the census my iwi, or who is it? And so we definitely want to drill down and look more at them. And that's when we're at the point where I'm like, qualitative work. But there's also this don't know their iwi and they identify as Māori in another ethnicity. And then we've got two kind of large groups that know their iwi and have different ethnic identity patterns. That's 38.6% behind that. So other notable results. So we were also, Eileen came up with this real great idea when we were talking about those people that might be on that borderline of sort of identifying as Māori descent or ethnicity or not. So she then went and linked things back to like DIA records, wasn't Eileen, and to see if there were people who had parents that had said they were Māori descent, and then they themselves didn't even say they were Māori descent when filling out the census and stuff. But it's interesting because when we probe that group more, there's that seventh group, there's 35,000 people in there. Their average age is 7 in terms of the group. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on there that it's probably some kind of age-related effect there. Of the people who don't know their iwi and they don't identify as Māori, 92, sweet, keen to talk later. Yeah, 92% of those who don't know their iwi didn't identify as Māori were Pākehā, 3.4% Pacific, but interestingly we had 4.3% said they were other ethnicity that were classified in that other group, and that's normally 1.7% of the general population. So again, something we should probe more. There's a pattern of age in knowing one's iwi, which has been found in past results. So generally it's that trend that the older that you are, the more likely you are to know your iwi. And but that being said, the people of mixed ethnicity as in terms of groups tended to be younger anyway. More men don't know their iwi as well. And so that's just kind of confirming past work that's used the 2013 census anyway. So we kind of expected there to be more men in the don't know iwi groups, but there aren't, particularly in the sole identifying as Māori, don't know iwi group, and don't know iwi but identify as Māori and other ethnicities. And so we looked at the groups in terms of the percentages in the most deprived quintile of the NZD scale. And we start to see this, so there's sort of a pattern here where people who solely identify as Māori are sort of overrepresented in that most deprived quintile, regardless of whether they know their iwi or not. And our two groups who don't identify their ethnicity as Māori were less likely to be there. So we've kind of got this pattern here. In terms of education levels, this is where there's potentially more of a difference between the sole identifying Māori groups. So those with no qualification here were who don't know were more likely to not have so those who don't know their iwi and only identify as Māori were more likely to not have a qualification when you compare them to those who know their iwi and they only identify as Māori. And a similar pattern for university degree or higher as well. So that's kind of where there's those differences in those sole identifying Māori category. We then went to look for discrimination items into Kupinga, and of course we're so limited by what questions say in a lot of this research. We looked at the percent who'd ever experienced discrimination, and this is not just race based on their race or ethnicity or culture, but any type of discrimination. And we saw that for those who don't identify their ethnicity as Māori, those dark blue bars, they had lower levels of discrimination. But we find that those who don't know the iwi and they only identify as Māori are consistently higher across a lot of the measures. This is just me presenting what I can today. And if we look at those who specifically had ever experienced discrimination because of their race or ethnic group, the highest ones for these are the sole identifying Māori, and higher still for those who don't know the iwi, which again is concerning given that they don't have that connection to, or maybe don't have that connection to Māori culture. And those who don't identify as Māori had experienced less ethnic group discrimination, as we expect there. But then looking at skin colour discrimination specifically, and this is interesting in terms of those who don't identify their ethnicity as Māori, they were far lower. But again, we see that don't know the iwi and sole identify as Māori as being the highest in terms of experiencing skin colour related discrimination. So just discussion, because I always run low on time. There are meaningful differences within Māori, and I think it's always important to be thinking about Māori diversity in all things. Again, as was alluded to before, I've ended up being a bit of a political commentator, and I swear most of my time is trying to not call Middle New Zealand racist. But other than that, it's like trying to be like, Māori are diverse. Māori have different views. Different Māori groups will have different views. Different hapu and iwi will have different views. Different Māori individuals, different Māori within whānau will have different views. Like literally repeating that over and over. But that's true of all of this and true of academic work, and we can even see that in our results, right? And I know there's other work going on about the best ways to classify someone as Māori or not. So again, that group of sort of concern would be that 19 or so thousand people who don't know the iwi, but only identify their ethnicity as Māori. They seem to be the most marginalised from our results, and we are going to go on and look at their health and social service needs. There's also that surprise that New Zealanders of Māori descent group being split between those who know the iwi and don't. And that's kind of quite, I guess, a new finding based on my reading of the literature. We expected them sort of to be distant, right? Or that thing where I know if I've got a class of first years and I'll kind of ask them about their background and they'll go, oh, I might have Māori whakapapa, oh, I don't really know if I do, oh, maybe my grandma says we're like 164th or whatever, you know, that kind of idea that you hear that people have, and they, you know, talk about it normally in that way. But actually a lot of them tend to know their iwi, so that's really interesting. So what are their barriers to maybe connecting with that whakapapa, and what are their barriers to saying that they're Māori on the census or in other forms? So this again has created so many more questions to me. We tried to compare identification across the 2013 census and Te Kupenga questions, and we're having a few issues around that because we found that we can talk more about it after if anyone's interested, but we found this really low rate of knowing their iwi in Te Kupenga, and then we ended up talking more with people and finding out that variable is normally matched to the census anyway, and so we don't really have a good source of trying to figure out whether people are identically saying, no, I don't know my iwi on, say, the census, but then in something like Te Kupenga or other surveys or other like things that they view as more Māori or more sort of safe, that they're then saying, actually I do, I just didn't want to write it down for you. There's also limitations around the racism questions, of course, like perceived discrimination. There's potentially confounds that mean with perceived discrimination about how you identify and whether you identify something as discrimination or not, that someone else might identify as discrimination. So that's as well a potential confound in this. Again, we go into the health and social service access needs now. Our demographic results suggest that there's probably going to be differences across those. Like I think we could probably quite hypothesize that we're going to find some differences. We, again, I think need to think about how people are answering these questions and how Māori are navigating these questions. And, you know, we hear this anecdotally a lot. You hear this, like so many different versions of these stories about how people might be answering these or offended by these or thinking about these questions. And so I think that that's an important future research direction. All of the decisions you make as well in your identity and how you identify are so political in and of themselves, and yeah, going to be different across contexts. And then longitudinal work, I think, will be quite interesting, looking at how some of these categories move. I've got colleagues that are looking at sort of the Māori role movement and are finding it really hard because every time you move address, you fill out your enrolment form, right? And it asks you, are you of Māori descent? And people will change across when they move. So it's like then really hard to figure out who's eligible and all this stuff. So yeah, I think that that'll be a fun direction to go in. Thank you so much. Yeah, happy for comments, questions, and I'm not doing anything afterwards, so happy to just keep talking. Barry.
Problem group identified who know they're soul Māori but don't know the Have you looked to see whether they are more likely to live in urban or rural?
Yes, we have, but there was not. Oh, so there was a question, I'll just repeat it for the Zoom, about whether there's urban and rural differences. Yes, we have, but there was nothing that really stuck out as interesting or unusual or different across the different groups. So that was, again, and we've also looked at, like, say, like number of children, and we've looked at occupation. There's some interesting stuff for occupation, but I've got more questions for Eileen about it, so I did not present it today. Yeah.
Adoption. So a lot of Māori that I've come across know that Māori don't know because they're children of adoptees.
Yep.
And they are unable to have those people. So there's something in that space too. And equally, I would think that would be the case for children with descendants.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat that for the Zoom. Yeah, so there was a question around Māori and severed whakapapa knowledge based on adoption or being in care, children in care. And yeah, that's kind of one of those things where we're hoping to, or we'll probably have a summer scholar that's going to be looking at all of the literature on those barriers, or yeah, looking at the why and the literature on the why, including looking into the more, I don't know, like, writing past academic work, going into sort of various editorials and I guess more on the memoir-y kind of that area in literature as well. So hoping to do that over summer. So hopefully we get money for that, which I'm so keen on. Yeah.
We comment, if you look now, the concept of an iwi is a sense of economic and cultural empowerment. But in the 2 decades after the Hunger Report in 1960, iwi would have been seen as a place of the past, and that whole sense of tribalism was seen as a very negative part of the future of Māori. And I wonder how that impacts on different generational views as to their capacity to specify that sense of being Māori. I mean, go back to the 50s and 60s in New Zealand, we were not. The concept of iwi was just not seen as in any way whatsoever positive in public life in New Zealand.
Yeah, so I'll repeat that Lynn had a Māori generational differences in the what iwi are and the perceptions of iwi, classic Lynn. But no, so it is a thing where, like, I think that some of those age group and generational differences here are really interesting. And again, it's that thing where it's like you talk to people and it is really interesting, right? I think that, yeah, the sort of Crown definitions of iwi as large natural groupings has been particularly interesting, and the idea of iwi registration as well. That's another thing that's come up just talking to the advisory group, and we've got a couple of people in that advisory group that are kind of more in the, oh, am I Māori, am I not, that kind of, and whether they should or could register. And then there's also these questions around registration for people who have been adopted or all those sorts of things. So that, like, raises that's another whole process that's been sort of that's come from policy that's then affecting identities, right? So I think there's, yeah, so many interesting things in that. And then also what iwi will look like post-settlement or have looked like post-settlement as well.
And on that, some iwi are construction.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, you want to carry that identity of that iwi multi-generation, that iwi construction for self-assessment.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it'll be, yeah, interesting because that's going to be so dependent on, yeah, location and yeah. Yeah.
Any question? How aware are some of the agencies of this physical thing?
I've just gotten started, but I would love to talk to anyone really. I'm happy to just like pop up and talk because it's, you know, one of the reasons I like my job.